So today is a special day. You might not have known it. It's one of those days in the lunar calendar, because Tibetans go by the lunar calendar, and so it's the configuration of these subtle energies and how they impact upon us. So today is one of the days. They call it one of the four. There's four in the year. There's kind of four. They call them Buddha days, I think, and they're days on which a certain configuration of all the subtle energies is quite powerful. And it's a day on which we celebrate the birth and the enlightenment and the parinirvana of the Buddha. And so it's said on these days, they're kind of very powerful days on which to do useful things. It's like kind of on certain days, you get really good return on your investment at the bank. Special days, they'll give you 100%, This is one of those days. So, yeah. So I think we did special things. Some people took the vows this morning. And then this evening, Geshe-la, I think, is leading a meditation. So it'd be nice to be part of that if you're around still. And meanwhile, we'll do our little usual thing and try to be our own therapists and sort out this messy mind of ours and have some confidence that it's got this marvelous potential and to know how to navigate it all and not lose the plot. That's what we're trying to do. That's why we're here. We're trying to not lose the plot. All right. So, okay, that's why we're here. So let me think about today. One of the things I was thinking about, when we start to look at our mind, and when I mean that quite seriously, because we think, well, what do you mean look at my mind? I know my mind, but we don't really. It's not part of our, I don't think it's part of our culture. We don't have really clear systems, of observing the thoughts that go on in our mind from the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep. And in fact, indeed, all during the night. We don't have skills like that. Like I've talked often, we only really notice what's going on in the mind when it becomes intensely emotional, when the body is shaking and the words are vomiting out your mouth and you want to kill yourself or your husband. And that's a little bit late. So one of the things is when we start to, this again, let's repeat, the essential idea that Buddha has, the fundamental point behind all the Buddha's teachings, all the Buddha's philosophy, all the Buddha's view of the universe, all the Buddha's epistemology, all the Buddha's etymology, all the Buddha's psychology, all these fancy Greek words, the fundamental point behind it all is that there are billions of sentient beings, mind possessors, and that everything we think and do and say is the process that produces the person we become and even produces universes. Now, I mean, that sounds beyond insane abstract. I agree with you, but that's literally the point. Of course, it takes time to first study that and then get to see the truth of that. As opposed to the view, which is the materialist view, we're starting to look into the meaning of life still, and we're not quite sure how the universe came into being, and we're looking at it only physically. And we look at the other views, they say the Christian view, the Muslim view, that posits a creator, a superior being who runs the universe. Now, I have no problem with that view, but it's not Buddha's view, that's all. So the Buddha's view and the Buddhist one, the Christian view, for example, and the Buddhist one, I've got some fundamental similarities, but some absolutely diametrically opposed differences. And it's just interesting. It's not meant to be sectarian. It's just fact, and it's up to us to decide which path we like. So the Buddhist idea, like I said, is we create our own reality. I mean, it sounds kind of cosmic, sounds cute, but it goes to incredible degrees of subtlety, this idea. So this is one of the points. Okay, when we start to say, take that view on board, and then we start to notice, because what Buddha's telling us is that what the main source of our happiness and suffering, and that sounds simplistic in a way, happiness and suffering, but if you look at the world, that's what drives all of us to be happy and not suffer. Put it right down to the most fundamental basics. So then what the Buddha's point is, and this is where he's diametrically opposed to the views that we tend to have as the view of reality, is that what goes on in here, the mind, Tibetans point there, they don't point there, there. What goes on in here is the main source of my happiness and my suffering. Now, those words are so simple, anybody can memorize it in 1 second. It's like saying E equals MC squared. Oh, I get that. I can say that. Yeah, well, you can. But to do it, honey child, that's the hard job. But that's the essence of it. So if that is the essence of it, then it's logical, given that I want to be happy and don't want to suffer, given that I want to cause other people happiness and want to cause other people to not suffer, given that, then it's logical, I'd better know how to look into my mind. It's pretty clear. And that's the difficult job. It's simple enough to say it, but that's the difficult job. Because why? Like we've talked often enough, because we're addicted to the outside world as being the main cause of suffering and happiness. So that's where all our attention goes automatically. So the point I want to get to today is that once we start that job, it becomes quite intense. We know we've got a mind. We know we have anxiety and love and kindness and jealousy, but we only notice them when it's emotional. We don't see deeper down while it's rumbling along at the level of concepts. We don't notice them because we don't look then. That's the skill that Buddha gives us. That's the skill he gives us. The ability, the skills through learning to meditation, the skill to notice what is happening in the mind before it comes to the surface as emotion. That's the essence of it. So now when we start to do that job, the first thing is we all think we're getting worse. This is a very interesting point. In the text, even the traditional texts, Pabonka Rinpoche mentions this, that when you start, that's what he was talking about when you start to learn to develop single-pointed concentration, that meditation technique developed by the Hindus 3,000 years ago, this genius technique, that's this essential technique in the Buddhist tradition. When you start to learn how to focus the mind, to concentrate the mind, he said, and it's described in the text in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. He says one of the signs of success at the first of the 9 is that you think your mind is getting worse. Hear my point. This is a common experience when we start to look into the mind before we even start to do concentration. Forget that. But he says it's not bad, it's good, because you are now noticing what's already been there all the time. You know, if you don't pay attention, you don't notice. So when you start to pay attention, you can't help but notice. And of course, what happens then is we think, oh my God, my mind, I can't believe how much anger I've got. It never stops. I'm getting worse, we think, and we have a panic attack, you know. So this is the point I want to discuss. If we take the view of karma, which means we come fully, or our little mind comes fully loaded, fully programmed with countless past habits. That's what, we're not coming from mummy and daddy's egg and we come from mummy, our body comes from mummy and daddy's egg and sperm. We can track our bodies back to the monkeys if you like, but we don't track our minds that way, not for the Buddha. Our minds have got their own continuum. This is the key difference in Buddhism. The consciousness, the mind, which is not physical, has its own continuity. So we track it back to previous moments of that very mind. Of course, it wasn't labeled Robina until you came out your mummy's womb, but it's like a river. When it's in Australia, when it's in one state in Victoria, it's called this name, and then it moves over to New South Wales, it becomes another name. We know that, but it's the same continuity of water. Well, this life that the mind and the body combination here is labeled Robina, but this mind came from before. The body, indeed, I can track back to mummy and daddy and the grandma and the monkeys. That's for sure, but not the mind. So the point is this: we come loaded, fully programmed from the first second of conception with our past habits, past tendencies, past karmic imprints. So there's masses of what we call unconscious in the world. We call it unconscious or subconscious. This subconscious, we call it. I mean, if we think the subconscious, when you think you began in your mother's womb, can you imagine how much subconscious there is if you've come from countless past lives? Wow, that's pretty much a lot of subconscious. So there's masses of stuff deep down in our mind. We only see the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg because we live at the grossest level of our mind, which is called conceptuality and sensory. That's the grossest level of cognition, you know. So when we start to pay attention to this cognitive process, we begin where we are at the grosser level, we start to dig deep, and you're inevitably going to start having you're going to be starting to be aware of all the junk. That's why what comes out in dreams is the stuff in our subconscious, not just from this life, but from countless past lives ago. So there's masses of unconscious in there, subconscious. And we've got to dig deep down and unpack and unravel all of that. And that's the job of that's the job of developing our mind to this marvelous potential Buddha says we have. So one of the inevitable consequences is, when you start to notice, you're going, oh my God, I'm so much more angry than I thought. I can't believe all these angry thoughts. They're all rising all the time, angry, angry, angry. Then we have a panic attack and think I'm being a bad Buddhist. I've got to stop all the anger. And we try to suffocate it. You can't do that. The energy is really strong. So there's two things that's going on here. So, let's say, let's say Caroline is my friend and I decide I'm having a bad time with my boyfriend, Lou, and I'm getting angry with him. So listen to this. The anger's rising up like crazy. So I go to my friend Caroline, and she's real, and we're just friends. And I go and I say, that Lou, he's so disgusting, he's outrageous, he does this, he does that. And she says, yes, isn't he a creep? How can you bear it, Robina? Now that's called feeding anger. That's called getting angry and buying into anger. And that's called anger. Now, the other one is this. You feel what's going on in your mind. You feel the rage arising, but you're trying to work on your mind. So then I go to see my friend Caroline and I talk about, I'm really getting so angry with Lou. I know it's not him. It's just my mind. I'm really trying hard and I want to kill him, but I know it's my mind. That's different. That's completely and totally different because you're working with it. So just because you feel angry doesn't mean you're creating the karma of being angry. The difference is, one, the anger arises because it's an old habit. It's been there for a long time. It's rising to the surface. The dirt is coming out. Then that's why it's so important not to converse with it, not to have a conversation, not to buy into it, not to increase it, not to make it grow. That's not called being angry. That's called anger coming out. It's a massive, huge, unbelievably important distinction to make. When we can do this, we will be brave and we'll see the shit in our mind and won't have a panic attack. This is one of the biggest mistakes we make. We become scared of our mind, but it's the dirt coming out. It's a really serious point. So of course, it's not easy not to buy into it. When the anger's rising like crazy in relation to Lou, it's easy to then join the conversation and then believe in the story and then make it more. Like I say to Caroline, yes, isn't he a creep, Robina? I agree with you. That's being angry. That's increasing anger. But I'm crying to her, struggling and telling her I'm struggling with my anger and she understands. And that's not being angry. That's working with your anger. So you have to know the difference. This is a major component of everybody's practice every day. You know, it's a huge difference. I can't describe the difference. It's massive. So don't be scared of your mind. Don't be scared of it. There's so much junk in it. There's so many ancient lifetimes of old ancient habits, you know. So we have to dig deep. We have to dig the dirt up. We have to put them in the washing machine, let the dirt come out. You're happy when you see all the dirt in the machine. You're not freaked out when you see your nice white, clean white t-shirt comes out all clean. The dirt is left in the water. You don't have a panic attack. You're glad the dirt is coming out. We have to have that view. And this is hard because we feel like we're naughty girls, you know. I always use that example. 1,000 times I tell that story. One of our friends, Roger, who's an Australian monk, who's been doing meditation retreats 30, 40 years in a series 3-year, 4-year retreats. At some point 30 years ago, he was out of his brain with rage and anger. He thought he was going nuts, you know, and he was really distressed. And he went to Rinpoche. I always tell the story. And Rinpoche laughed and laughed and said, the dirt, fantastic. The dirt is coming out. The dirt is coming out. We've got to understand this, but it demands intelligence because the ego in us has a panic attack and thinks we're naughty girls, and then we try to suffocate it or we get guilty and we just increase the drama. You know, there's no help at all. So don't be scared. And that's why we have these naive ideas of spiritual practice. Oh, when you start to meditate, you get better. Oh, I feel so lovely. It's just so naive, you know. It's like thinking you go to the gym the first time when you're 20 pounds overweight, you come back looking divine. What a joke. You come back feeling worse. We know this. We have to be courageous in this job, you know. I'm really serious. The idea that spiritual practice makes you lovely and feel more loving and kind, eventually, yes, it will. Eventually going to the gym will make you healthy and look divine with your muscle tone. But give it a time, please. The dirt's got to come out. I can't stress this enough. Are we communicating? So now ask me some questions. Yes, Brian.
Good morning, Venerable.
Morning, darling.
I've wanted to ask this for a long time, and now we're talking about it. So generally, we talk about in our culture, very negative people and very positive people. You'll hear negative people say, oh, I'm just being realistic. And then you'll hear positive people saying, oh, well, there's always like a silver lining.
Yeah.
I think the hard work is, you know, most people want to be positive, even if they find it very difficult. And I know that we bring karma with us, we bring God knows what.
Yeah.
But my question is, so to be very positive, but still have that one foot in the door of reality.
Yes,
I think finding that balance,
that's right,
seems very, very difficult.
No, so I think we have to look at the context then. Let's look at the context, Brian. So this is the point. If you would just wake up one morning and feel pain in your body and you're not doing anything, you just get pain in your body, that's not a good sign, is it? You've got a problem. Where's Brian gone? His picture's disappeared. What happened to Brian? I've got to see you. there you go. So do you hear so this is the point now. So if you just wake up in the morning and you have a lot of pain, that's a problem, isn't it? Would you agree? But if you decide to go to the gym and you have a goal to become a handsome, fit Brian, then you wake up with pain, it's different. Can you see what I'm getting at? So there's got to be a framework. So the positive isn't just, the positive isn't just, we tend to think of the positive just being cross your fingers and hope for the best. And the negative is, oh my God, everything's doom and disaster. But if we're on a path, if we've got the view that I can develop myself mentally into a marvelous person, you get my point here, mental gym, if you're in the mental gym, then that's the framework in which we're discussing. So the positive is the divine picture of you, Brian, looking wonderful with this muscle tone in 6 months. So your goal is the positive and you're moving towards it. That's when the shit has to come out, and that's so-called the negative, but you see it in a different light. So then that's the realistic. The realistic is you're still overweight. I'm so sorry, you people, this is urgent. I have to take it. Please forgive me. So can you see what I'm getting at? So the positive, no matter how, another way of saying it, no matter how bad the world is, this is an interesting point, but we don't quite tend to see, Brian. There are terrible things happening in the world. Fact. Now, if we've mainly got anger in the mind, we're only ever going to notice the negative. Mm. Do you see my point? It's all a question of viewpoint. You know very well you can have two people looking at the same thing. One person will have compassion for all the people fighting with each other. The other person will get angry with both of them. So it's all a question of what's in your mind. So if it's mainly anger in the mind, we'll always see the negative. And it is realistic, but it's only within a framework. There's other good things going on, but we don't see them. So the person who's positive will still, there's another way of saying it, will see the terrible things, but will know there's potential that there can be better. And you're aiming for the better. You're aiming for the good. You get my point?
Yes.
I mean, for example, we all know some people who just seem to be naturally more happy and more loving and more beaming and smiling no matter what. So, we've got some people who see the world and they're completely depressed. They stay in their house. They're miserable. No one loves me. I don't know what to do. The world is a disaster, and they're miserable. They don't even lift a finger. Another person will be, what can I do to help? And they'll go out there, no matter how bad it is, they'll be in the war zone, but they'll be positive and optimistic because they're doing something to help. You get my point?
Yes.
There's these different approaches, but in terms of our own progress, it was what we're talking about here, very personal. There is lots of shit in there. There's no doubt. But when we know that doesn't define us, and we know we're aiming for the positive. In other words, if you keep identifying with 20-pound overweight Brian, and that's the real Brian, you'll get very depressed. But if you know that you can change your body into a handsome, well-toned Brian, you identify with that potential and you move towards it. That's the positive. So the realistic is that you're fat and overweight now, but you're moving towards the positive. And that's the same with the mind. That's the Buddha's view. We've got amazing potential to be clear and wise and joyful. It's not Pollyanna. So we're moving towards that and identifying with that. And to do that, you've got to see the shit now, because that's what's stopping you. So you have to see the rubbish in order to fix it and change it, because it's not permanent. You with me?
Yes, thank you. Excellent.
These different approaches, then they keep us steady, Thank you, Brian. This is such a good point. So what else, people? What else, darlings? Anything other that comes out of this? Nothing. So you all understand. But it's hard because, this is the thing we've got to see, and this is the so-called realistic one.
I do have a question.
Who's I? Where are you, darlings?
Gisela.
Oh, hello, Gisela. Talk to me, my dear.
Hello, Venerable. Thank you. My question is, when you begin to identify, the only word I can use is pendulum swing, when you are actually integrating with other people and you begin to see the attachment and aversion, it kind of is swinging at the same time.
In your own mind, you mean?
In my own mind, I can see where the attachment is and then where the aversion is happening.
Yes.
How to find a balance when communicating in that state with people.
Okay. There's a really nice way they say it in Tibetan. When you're with others, there's two things. You really watch your behavior, meaning you really police what you say and do. And when you're on your own, you can watch your mind and work on your mind. If we're that talented, we can do both simultaneously. But the cautious one is when you're with others, you know, you really just behave nicely. You control your, and that means speech, most of us. We're not going around killing and shooting too many people. So you just control your speech. You can see your mind maybe being very turbulent, but at least you control what comes out of your mouth, because that's what impacts upon the other people, especially when it's close people and intense relationships and family where all the dramas can be. You watch your speech like a hawk, Gisela, and then that's not even watching your mind yet. The speech is the expression of what's in your mind. And when you're with others, that's what we've got to watch. Do you understand my point?
I do. Thank you.
That's the key practice. And then you can see your mind, maybe you can feel yourself wanting to kill your grandfather, but you're being kind. Yes, grandfather, and smile. That's, I can't tell how that powerful that is, because when we don't have control over our mind and we don't think that we can control our speech, we don't think like that in our culture. It all just vomits out and we get so confused. So the practice when you're with others is control the behavior and the speech. When you're on your own, you can then do your own practice in the mind. That's where it's safe. This is a really powerful point, actually.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you
for that clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, darling. So good.
Thank you.
So go on. Was something else there, Lou? Was there?
There's nothing in the chat from
Oh, I see. Okay, fine. Okay. So I was going to say something now. I forget. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, these words we can understand. We hear them, you know. But we've got to develop some confidence. Part of the thing, the irony of ego is because the voices of ego, the meaning of ego in Buddhism is a very loose term, really, the way we use it in the West, but it's really referring to this very powerful, deeply grasping, fear-based, instinctive feeling of this concrete I that's separate from everything else. And so it's kind of like, and this is the interesting point when you study Buddhist psychology, you really get to see that fear, this kind of sense of panic or anxiety, informs all the neuroses. The sense of discomfort and anxiety or worry, whether we're on our own or with others, that's the energy of ego. It's kind of ironic. It's not happy. Ego's not happy. So because we're so fixated too on being a good girl and being a good boy, when with other people, let's say, you know, you're with other people and you get some daggers from somebody, you're in a family situation and people are it's all upsetting and kind of distressing. And, you know, if you're not confident, even the one I'm talking just now, Gisela, if you're not confident that you can control your mouth, this is something that we do not think of in our culture. We just think of there's a big lump of me, you know, but we can divide into the mind, the body, what you do with your hands and everything, and your speech. It's quite powerful. And then when you practice, and the first level of practice, of course, is control your body and speech. This is huge. When you have confidence, you can do that. And how do you get that confidence? You know you're going to go to that party, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday party, family, whatever it might be, especially when it's the dynamics of family, you know. Let's say, for example, or the dynamics of a work situation. We feel nervous. We know this person they don't like us, that person thinks something, somebody else, that person, we're worried. And this worry underpins everything. And then if we're not making a decision before we go to work, before we go to that party, you've got to make a firm decision. I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk. Then you will be confident that you will control your speech. Even if your mind is turbulent, but you've got control over your speech. And that's unbelievably powerful. Because then you don't do damage, you know, because that's when all the damage happens, when the words come out, isn't it? So sometimes, of course, some people have very controlled speech, but there's no awareness of what's going on in their mind. It's all suffocated. That's no good either. That's useless. But this is the wonderful point. When you're with others, control your behavior. When you're on your own, you control your mind. You look at your mind, you let it all come out, you deal with it, you work with it, you know, it's your own private practice. This is a huge point. But you've got to have that confidence that you can do that. And that takes time because our ego is very fragile. It's not confident. It's all over the place, you know, all over the place, like a little girl in there, you know. So at least we don't harm others. See, this is the thing about some people, some of us have a tendency to be very explosive and open, like me, for example. I would say everything I ever felt and thought I was so clever. Other people don't know what they feel and then don't say it. So it's really suffocated. You behave nicely. And I tell you, that's a good quality. Don't ever put that down. That means you don't harm others. But you have to know what's going on in your mind. And that's scary sometimes. It is scary for most of us. especially because we're driven, like we often talk, by this deepest attachment of all, which we don't even really almost have a name for. This, when we call it, I mean, it doesn't sound like a delusion to us. It sounds like normal. We all crave to be liked. Even in Buddhism, it's called, sounds very technical. It's called attachment to reputation. It sounds hilarious. Oh, I don't care about my reputation. No, it doesn't mean that. It means you want to be liked. We crave to be liked. We crave to be approved of. And we've got to ask the question, why? We just take it for granted. It's normal, we'll say. It's normal human behavior, we'll say. No, it's a delusion when it's neurotic. Because we don't have a sense of who we are. We don't know ourselves. We don't approve of ourselves. We don't believe who we are. We don't even know who we are. We just identify, and this is with the trouble, and then we identify with the rubbish instead of the goodness. And that's the business I said to Brian, you know. The rubbish is there. You are angry. You are jealous. You are anxious. Your mind is out of control. That's rubbish. But a fact. But don't be scared of it. Know you've got potential. If you've only got potential, then you're a disaster. You know, then you might as well then you're a disaster. And that's our problem. The irony again of ego and of all the delusions, they're very fixed. They're fixated. They're very absolute in their viewpoint. Anger is very absolute. That is bad, and you're seeing nothing else. And you paint the whole of that person with that one bad action. And when you have the guilt, I hate me, I am bad, we paint the whole of ourselves with that one brush. So speaking technically, that's because we see everything as self-existent. This is where the teachings of emptiness come in, which is quite subtle. We see everything as having an absolute concrete entity. Everything is absolute. Everything is real, concrete, solid. There's no nuance. Things do not exist like that. So when we have more confidence in that, we can learn to see things from another point of view. In other words, anger is fixated on one thing and can't see anything else. Attachment is fixated on one thing and can't see anything else. Anxiety is fixated on one thing and can't see anything else. There's no space. So the virtuous states of mind, kind of confidence and patience and perseverance and kindness, they're not fixated. They're more spacious. So we've got to buy into those parts of our mind. Say positive words to ourselves, build ourselves up in a positive way, you know. I don't know, what else is there, people? Talk to me. What's coming up recently? Anything? People? Nothing? Judith, you there? You want to have something to say? Judith, you look like you're pressing your button.
Yeah.
Good, darling.
I have in one of your attachment lectures, you referred to three things, and I think it was the primordial level, then attachment and anger. But you said, you know, we're not going to deal with this at primordial.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
So,
you'd like, okay, let's talk about it then.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'll do that. That's what I just started to discuss now. So let's look at this one. This is a more subtle one, Judith, and it seems initially more abstract to us and was hard. But let's just talk about it in a sort of experiential way. In the end, all the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist levels of practice are all structured in such a way that they all lead us to this deepest level of understanding our mind, and understanding the deepest, most primordial rubbish in the mind. So we've got the rubbish in the mind and we have the good stuff in the mind, speaking simply. So in day-to-day, the three main delusions, that's what I was referring to. The Buddha calls them the three poisons. You know, we can see there's three toxic emotions. We've got the two main ones in day-to-day life effectively running the show, like Gisela pointed out, attachment, this little hungry little girl inside that only wants all the lovely things. And then when it doesn't get the lovely things, the panic attack of aversion, oh my God, panic attack, everything's disaster. That's aversion. That expresses itself as anger or despair or depression or just worry and fears, you understand? And the attachment is this little girl who's always wanting something lovely. So we run between these two like drunken sailors 1,000 times a day. Now what underpins both of them is this more primordial mistake. They simply call it, the term in Buddhism, the term in Buddhist psychology is simply the word ignorance. It's ma-rigpa, unawareness. It's primordial unawareness. It's kind of putting in a negating kind of way. We have this total unawareness of the way that things actually are much more nuanced than, you know, because attachment and aversion are very fundamentalist. Like I said, they're fundamentalist. They're very fixed. They're very absolute. Everything is bad or everything is good. So this ignorance that underpins these, and we can call it self-grasping or ego grasping. It's this primordial sense, a wrong sense of a fixed, hopeless, separate, concrete, pointable little me in there running the show. That's the main energy. And then attachment is the main voice of that ego. And then aversion is the panic when the attachment doesn't get what it wants. So there's this intimate relationship between these three. So the one that underpins everything, we can call it ego grasping. And it's very subtle. We don't see it overtly, but it informs attachment and informs anger and all the other dramas. So, so then the way it functions, one simple way it functions. For example, let's say attachment to the chocolate cake, just something simple. Because the Buddha is saying we've got this wrong view, not just about the self, but about everything. So then what happens is if you've got attachment for the chocolate cake, so we know if you do the analysis, if you wrote down a description of the chocolate cake, you'd say, wow, this really delicious cake, it had this special icing on it, that was really beautifully made, and it had this kind of almond flour, and you describe it in a very delicious way. So then you know the contents of it, but you know that it looks extremely delicious. Now, if I'm sitting next to you, and I can't stand chocolate cake because I vomit, then I will describe a completely different thing. Now, we know this. Our mothers would tell us that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. This is profound. So this is exactly what Buddha's saying. The key function of all these delusions is they exaggerate the status of something. So attachment over exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. In my case, I've got my aversion glasses on, and that exaggerates the ugliness of the cake. And underneath both of these is this primordial assumption that deliciousness or that ugliness, whichever one we see, exists intrinsically in the cake, as if it's coming from the cake. And you're this innocent observer. And if it's attachment, you feel I've got no choice, I must just eat it. And if it's aversion, you've got no choice but to want to throw it in the bin. So this primordial delusion underneath both of those, the deep assumption that delicious cake exists on that plate, having nothing to do with your mind calling it delicious. Can you hear that? So then the same with our own self. If it's not the same with other people, you could be in love with Lou one day and then he cheats on you. So 1 minute you see him as divine, next minute you see him as ugly. And in both cases, the ego grasping in you, the ignorance in you, it assumes that divine, delicious Lou is coursing, it's like deliciousness coursing in his veins along with his blood, as if it's got nothing to do with you observing Lou. And then suddenly he's ugly because he cheated on you, and now you think ugliness is coursing through his veins, as if it's got nothing to you observing it. So the Buddhist one is the observer is the main role. We cause things to appear to us in the way they appear. That's the really profound function. That's the way things do exist, Buddha says. But having this deep ignorance inside us that causes us to cling to this real solid separate me, real solid separate Lou, real solid separate cake, this is the mistake. And it's quite a subtle mistake. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Okay. That's a way of talking about the primordial mistake. It's the one that underpins all the others. And you've got to dig yourself through that. So that's why the very first level in the Buddhist teachings, control the servants of your attachment, control the servants of your anger, and don't punch the person and don't eat too much cake. You control the body and speech first. Then you get a bit of a harness on that. And now you can get to the next level of practice and start to deal with the attachment and the aversion themselves. And as you get more advanced, you can now get to the root delusion that underpins even the attachment and the aversion, which is this assumption of intrinsic nature, concrete nature, absolute cake, absolute Lou, absolute me. That's the way of saying. And it causes us to feel, I mean, all these delusions are in their nature fear-based, panicked, miserable, unhappy, distorted, distressed. That's their character. And as the Buddha is saying, as we progress, lessening these delusions, stopping believing in their stories, and then you steady the attachment down, you steady the aversion, that means you become more steady, more kind, more spacious, more patient, and then eventually you realize emptiness, quote unquote, and you realize that I that you thought has been there all these years and lifetimes has never been there, this fantasy I. You realize the absence of that fantasy, and then there's no longer fear, no longer misery, no longer longer suffering. You've cut the root of all of it. That's the progress. Any questions from that, Judith? It's just a one approach, that's all. There's masses to talk about it.
But I will try to make a short comment. In a very deep meditation one day, I met, which then later, hearing your words, I understood I was at a very primordial level. And
Okay,
it
good.
wasn't words, it wasn't stories,
Yeah.
but it was awful.
Awful. It was awful, not nice.
It was full of disdain and dislike. And so thank goodness for meeting people like you, because when I first came out of that, then there were thoughts and comments. And now I can see it's a point of view, and with the 7 points of mind training, get some antidotes in there, etc.
Amazing.
But meeting it initially as a little human being, which is what I am, who functions at a gross level, I'm telling you, I thought I myself, to your point, I was hell.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I think that's just a bit of that I think is a bit of purification, because you're seeing your mind, you're seeing the shitty stuff. That's good. I mean, that's a good sign, Judith. Because
I think so, but it was
not happy. No, I understand. I hear you, darling. No, you're doing the way you speak. I can hear very clearly. You're doing beautifully. You're on track, Judith. Keep moving.
I'm working, and I'm thankful
I
for
admire
all of you teachers. It's so thankful.
Well done, Judith. Thank you, sweetheart. What else you do, people? Who else has got a point? I saw another hand. Yes, Barbara. Hello, sweetheart.
Hi. So I understand that, this work that we have to do and bringing up these emotions, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I do understand that process. So what do we do when we feel that we are the cake or the loo in somebody's life, where one day we are the object of attachment and the next day we are the object, there's extreme aversion, and we are on their pendulum swinging back and forth. How do we find our center, and how do we deal with that? Thank you.
Especially, Barbara, so I'm assuming it's a person that you're close to. I don't want to be too private, but it's someone that is close in your life. Yeah, this is inevitable. And this is the first point, Barbara. This is where the first job, we've got the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. And what we're discussing here is the wisdom wing, which is the work we do on ourselves. That informs our ability then to see others. So when you know your mind, Barbara, when you know your aversion, your attachments, your pendulum, when you know your dramas, your instability, and how that causes you so much pain, then you can then identify in the other person, wow, I understand that. I recognize exactly what's going on. So that's one piece. Even if that you see it, if not even in relation to you, but as an objective ability to see this person's mind, whether you see them in relation to someone else or to you. So that objectivity is important. You recognize what's going on in their mind. Why? Because you know it in yourself. And if you don't know it properly in yourself, and if you haven't developed some stability of working on yourself, then it will make you very unstable to see a person focusing on you in that way. So what makes you more stable first is you knowing this inside your own mind. Then you can recognize it, and already that brings some empathy and a little bit of objectivity and a little bit of space. But if we've not looked on our own mind, if we've never looked into our own mind, and we never look into our own emotional hunger to be liked and approved of, then there's going to be a panic attack. And this is why we have so much dramas in our relationships, because the underpinning attachment we all have, as I said, is the craving to be approved of. So we're watching, let's say it's my husband, and I'm watching him like a hawk, and he's smiling at me. Well, attachment's getting what it wants, so I feel enormously relieved. Oh, I must be a good girl. And then as soon as he comes home in a bad temper, I have a panic attack and take it personally. Oh my God, he doesn't approve of me. I'm a bad person. So we've got to have done the work in our own mind first. That's what brings stability, Barbara. That's what brings the stability. Then you can handle what people throw at you. That's the fundamental answer. You get my point here?
Yes, thank you so much.
That's the key to it. And we don't necessarily think this way in our culture. The wisdom wing is taking care of yourself, not just meaning go and have a massage and a sleep. It means working on your own rubbish. And that gives you the ability to then recognize that in somebody else. And when you are the object of it, it gives you more strength to be more objective and not buy into the rubbish, because your own attachment to them liking you or not liking you isn't so powerful. That's the work you have to do, and that informs your ability to then deal with the person on the outside. That's why we as people, as mothers, go crazy, because the children, you know, when we're adoring our son and our daughter, and as they get older, they start pulling all our strings, we go mad because we haven't done the work inside. And if, you know, we just go nuts, or if it's a partner, we go, that's why we go crazy. So we've got to do the inner work first. And then you'll be wise, Barbara. Then you won't get hooked by their rubbish. You won't get hooked by it, and you'll understand it, and you'll begin possibly even to have empathy, because you know how it feels in yourself. This is really the point. And that's why, Barbara, also, given that we're ordinary people, I mean, to me, the ordinary way we all live our lives, because none of us is that rich, we don't have much real estate. So who has the luxury of having your own bedroom? The typical one of the romantic notion of being in love with somebody, you sleep in the same bed, live in the same room, live in the same kitchen. No wonder we kill each other. So, you know, one of the key things is we have to recognize our own lack of ability to be socially wise. So we need some space, Barbara. It's like a miracle. I always tell this story, actually, about my family. There were 7 siblings, all very close in age. My poor darling mother got so busy. 8 babies in about 9 years or something, 10 years. Anyway, we weren't that rich. We were quite poor. We didn't even have enough beds. They had so many babies so quickly they couldn't catch up with the furniture. So it was intense, right? Okay, we're all in fit. I mean, there were 6 girls and a boy, okay? And we all speak fast like I do. We're a bit busy. The girls are all bosses, the lot of us, the whole lot of us, the 6 of us. My brother's the youngest. Anyway, whatever. The point is, there was a typical dynamic of 9 human beings in the family, the mother, the father, and the 7 children. And it was quite intense, like most families. And we all had our own ways of responding, you know. So mine, I'm quite volatile, as you can see, and I'm quite loud and bossy and angry and all those things. So that for me, I was a terrible child. I was kind of bully my sisters, and we had to sleep together in the same beds. We had to rotate, and we didn't have enough beds. And 2 of my sisters had asthma. I'd put the pillow on their face because I couldn't sleep. I mean, it sounded so cruel, but, you know, we're coming from my own place, never finding any space to breathe. That's how it felt to me. Now, this is the point I'm getting at. I didn't know that I needed space. My mother didn't know that either. There were 7 little children, and we put all the children in the room together and wonder why we kill each other. But I mean, what happened was when I was about 12, I was really naughty. Doesn't matter, I'd talk about the story. And my mother found me in her high heels and lipstick trying to seduce the greengrocer's son with I was 12, I think. She panicked and sent me to live at school. As a boarding school, a Catholic convent. So you could live there as well. And she sent me to live at school. Well, the fact is, all my life, even though I was naughty, I loved God. I was in love with Our Lady and all the saints. I went to mass, but I was naughty on the outside because it was this volatile environment, and I had no control over my body and speech, none whatsoever. I was a little girl. So she sent me to boarding school. My point is this: because the environment changed, I became a saint overnight. Suddenly, the new part of Robina, which would never be obvious before, came out. I went to mass every day. I learned Latin. I learned the mass in Latin. I studied. I was disciplined. I was well behaved because I had a new environment. This was a miracle. I didn't know what I was missing. But when I got the new environment, then that encouraged the best part of me. So no wonder we behave badly. And this is also the point. It was my mind. It was my behavior. I can't blame anybody else. But put me in another situation, it encouraged the better part of me. And then we understand this. We'll have some self-respect and give ourselves some space. Make sure we choose the space. We have to have this. It's not fair to ourselves to be in the face of the objects of attachment and aversion every day. We will go crazy. We have to have respect. The mind is the point, but the conditions are huge. And I'll never forget that as a child, you know. Are you with me, Barbara?
Yes, thank you so
We
much
have to
for
know
that.
our own capability. We have to have enough awareness to know what we need. And that's why it is intelligent sometimes to leave the relationship. I mean, in our culture where it's considered bad to be divorced, we think we just got to live and suffer. That's completely insane. To have enough self-respect to know that a certain relationship is no longer healthy for me or them, and it is a wise, intelligent thing to do to leave it. And that needs a lot of courage. It's a really important point, you know. Yes, Gisela. Unmute, sweetheart. Yes. Can't hear you still. Unmute. There you go.
Thank you very much, Venerable Robina. I am so sorry. I was like in my own, like really concentrating on what you were saying.
Yes.
A lot of things came up with that. The first one, it was in regards to relationships. And I think that that's probably the one that the majority of people can mostly identify with, whether it is an intimate relationship, sibling relationship, or even parental relationship.
Sure. Yeah.
When you are able to go back to your memories as far back as you're able, as maybe for me, it's my first memory. I was maybe about 3 or 4, and it's a very specific memory for myself. I began to see where my attachment began in right here and right now, in the sense of, oh, I don't have mommy and daddy meeting those needs. Oh, I don't have, everything else. And so you begin to cultivate yourself according to your environment.
Yes, sure. That's right. So then?
Untangling yourself from that environmental conditioning is very challenging.
It is, darling. Yes, exactly. Gisela.
And living in a Western culture, you begin to really heavily see the material components
That's right, exactly.
of the attachment.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right, darling. So let's look at, so I think the good point, thank you, Gisela. The point here, let's look at it then. There are 2 things going on, and this is what from your memory, you can see it. There are 2 things going on. There's a person called your mother and father. They're out there. And then there's you. So that we have, the main thing is by seeing the external, what that has to help you then do is look into the internal, and then we have to label what is happening in the internal. And that one is called attachment to being seen and loved and respected
Reputation.
as a little girl. So in other words, it's attachment to this reputation. And this, Gisela, is so profound. It's the suffering for most of us. But because what we do is we get addicted to seeing the external, and then the sadness and the anger comes, it's not fair, and I didn't get what I wanted. But the fact of the matter is, if let's just pretend we had come into this life from being a practitioner in the past, and you come into this life with no attachment to being seen and loved, then all you would have would be compassion for your parents, and there wouldn't be any pain and any suffering. So the real key is what you're identifying is this deepest, most primordial attachment, and you recognize back then it wasn't being met, and then that's where the sadness starts to come, and the loneliness starts to come, and the resentment. So notice that that's the attachment, and that's the thing to work on. That's the one, Gisela, that's the one. And then we have to, so what we're doing, trying to become our own person, I love that phrase in our culture, we're healing that attachment and learning to become a whole person in ourself. Then you can eventually, when the time is right, recognize your own parents suffering, how they literally were not capable of giving you whatever. But the real pain is that bottomless pit of neediness that didn't get what it wanted. And this is the irony, Gisela. Some people with really intense attachment to reputation can have wonderful parents, but because the attachment is so deep, it will never be satisfied. Because the deepest feeling of that attachment is no matter what I get, it will never be enough. So we've got to even not assume that you weren't getting enough love and compassion. It's because we didn't think it was enough love and compassion. We've got to make that distinction. It's very powerful. You get my point here, darling?
I do. Thank you.
Good.
I
It's
do.
a very
Thank
important
you.
point, darling. So thank you for bringing it up. Thank you. This is the deepest one for all of us. It's very fascinating. Thank you, Gisela. So what else, darlings? 10 minutes to go. No, nothing. No points. Judith looks like she's-
Alona has a question, but I don't want to
Oh,
be.
Alona and then Judith. Good. Alona first. Go, darling.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for your teaching.
Good.
I have this situation, my mom's husband, he's in and out of the hospitals, and
He's
he's in and out of the hospitals.
Okay.
He's not well, and he's not gonna get better. I was helping with money. I was paying for lots of this, medical care. And I don't want to go in debt anymore because I think because they're in Ukraine, and I need to preserve some of my money for my mom and my brother.
Yes, exactly.
And but I do like what comes for me. I feel like I'm supposed to care for all sentient beings, and I have this kind of dilemma in my head. I take the vow to
Yes.
help everybody,
Yes.
and I just, it's kind of cold decision.
Yes.
I have to choose.
Yes, you do.
Between
You
my
do.
mom and him.
Yes, you do have
And
to
I choose my mom. So
okay, but maybe there's a way of framing it for your mind. Maybe just sort of find it, not to make it sound so absolute, like it being cruel. Just you maybe just have to. I mean, you're right. In the end, if you've only got a limited resources, you do have. I mean, you have to see it as coldly as that. You don't have millions of dollars, so you can't. But what you can also keep in your mind is the wish. If I could, I would offer everything he needed. Have that wish. Never give up that wish, Alona. Don't give up the wish. But I know all I can do is this much. Think of it that way, more spacious. Not, I can't help my mother's husband, but I will help my mother. That's too concrete. I do only want to help him. If I could, I would help him, but I've only got this much, so I'll do what I can. Be more spacious in the way you say it, and more positive, even in the way you say about not being able to give to him. Do you get my point here? It's better for your mind. Don't give up the wish that if you could, you would. Have that wish every day, because then that wish could open the doors to something happening unexpectedly. Don't be concrete in your thoughts, but still be clear about your resources. Of course, darling. Because things always change. In the end, you could lose all your money, you could win $1 million. You don't know. So have the wish to do what you can. I wish I could, and then you do what you can. You understand, darling? It's your thinking that's important. Don't see it as a kind of a concrete dilemma that'll make you miserable. You understand me?
Yes.
I mean, the fact is, you can look at the world. If I could stop the war in Ukraine, I would, but you can't. But you still have the thought, if I could, I would. That's the bodhisattva thought, the confident thought, if I could, I would. And that creates the cause for you to become more courageous and more capable. Always have those thoughts. Don't give that up. And then you be realistic in relation to your own capability now. You get my point?
Yes.
Good, darling. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Keep them. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yes, now, Judith. Yes, sweetheart.
Well, I was going to ask you to go a little further with in response to Gisela, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. If not, forgive me.
Okay.
But then Alona, again, pronunciation, I have this sense that there's a link to these two situations. That
say it in your own words, the situations. What do you mean?
Well, you were talking about that very deep
need to be approved of,
to be filled up.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
Whatever,
yeah.
And how to walk through that. And then when Alona asked, I was going to ask you to go further with that, but I also think I can see a link between.
No, totally. So this is okay. This is a different discussion now, but you're absolutely right, Judith. When, let's say, it's just your child. Let's say it's your child, your grandchild, anybody, who cares? And on the one hand, you have love and compassion for this person. There's no doubt. You want them to be happy. You don't want them to suffer. You would do anything for them. But then if we haven't worked on your attachment, because you also have masses of attachment for this person, then that's what pollutes your compassion. That will drag your compassion down. It'll make you miserable. It'll make you foolish. You'll keep giving this child whatever they want, thinking you're being compassionate, but you're not. You're not being wise. That's when it's foolish. That's when you'll get used and abused and allow people to manipulate you, because your attachment is the problem, not the compassion. You get my point?
Yeah.
So that's why compassion on its own is not enough, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, or Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. So in like an Alona's case, let's say she's got also, as well as compassion, let's say she's got lots of attachment to being seen as a kind person, then no matter what she does for her mother's husband, even if she spends every penny in the bank, she'll still be miserable and she'll still be upset. So we've got to distinguish between the compassion, which is virtuous, and then the attachment, which is the need to be seen as a nice mother, seen or to get someone's approval. So when we're attached as a grandparent to a child or a mother to a child, we're actually craving their approval. That's why we're scared to tell them off. That's why we're scared to say no to them. That's wisdom. So then real compassion is mixed with wisdom. So that's what, in a sense, what I was saying to Alona, her compassion, don't ever stop the compassion, but it's got to be mixed with the wisdom, which in this case is the limitations of what she's capable of doing, and then be content with that. Even if her mother's husband gets mad at her, that's the wisdom part that makes us strong. And that means giving up the neediness to be seen as a good girl, whatever it might be. That's what pollutes our compassion now. You with me?
Yes.
You're right, Judith. There is a deep connection. This is the wisdom wing is one thing, the compassion wing is another. And unless we see deeply into our minds, our compassion will always be limited, you know. And this is the other point. I mean, Alona didn't mention it, but let's say we haven't worked on our mind. Let's say we've got masses of attachment. And the primordial level of attachment is this little junkie in us that just wants everything to be lovely. It can't cope with problems. Attachment's like this fragile little child in us that has to be fed all the time with lovely things. So there you are, but you've also got compassion. And you look at the war, let's say, because Alona's Ukrainian, aren't you, Alona? So let's say she looks at the war in her home country. She has incredible compassion, but let's say she's got masses of attachment as well. Then she'll freak out and get depressed and upset and will go crazy. She doesn't go crazy because she's got compassion. She goes crazy because attachment can't stand and doesn't know how to deal with problems. So giving up attachment is what puts iron and strength within our compassion. It makes us powerful and wise and clear, and it increases our compassion. We don't become afraid because delusions are rooted in fear. Good, really important points. There's now 3 minutes to go. Just close your eyes, everybody. Relax as the most natural thing in the world. Close your eyes and simply pay attention for 3 quality minutes. Pay attention to whatever pops up in your mind. Don't label it. Don't get involved in the conversation. Don't try to make it go away. Just sit there and watch. That's it. Very spacious, very clear, very focused. Just keep the mind focused, the attention focused, but relaxed. Don't space out. Don't sink into the thoughts. Just watch clearly, sharply, alertly. That's it, sweethearts. So we just watched our mind very intensely for 1 whole hour. How amazing. Keep moving, keep doing the job, keep growing, keep going deeper, deeper, unpacking, unraveling. Don't be afraid. See it, label it appropriately, and keep moving towards your amazing potential and never give up. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Maki Panam Keguchi, Kepanyampa, Mepa Yangon Negondu, Shog. May this compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Okay, darling people, thank you for all your questions. Everybody, Judith and Brian and Gisela and Alona, everybody, and Barbara. Thank you, sweethearts. Much love.